Hey everybody, today we are going to do a before and after on my 125 here. I'm getting ready to get in and do a water change, and we're going to work on the filter today. Probably no point in showing you the insides of the filter. I'll explain what I'm doing and why. The water's still a little bit green looking from the medication I put in there, but it also is a little bit green looking because it's got stuff swirling around in it that almost seems like algae, but I'm not entirely sure what's going on. I was just in there kind of rooting around a little bit, and that's why everything looks so disturbed at the moment. But a lot of this stuff is floating to and settling on, if you want to say settling on the top, and it's creating almost like this little bit of surface scum. And again, I'm not sure what it is. You can see all of the sort of particulate matter. I'm not talking about the big chunks of swirly stuff. I'm talking about how you can just see it almost looks like fog. Not so much the green color, but just the tiny little particulates in the tank. And so I've done well, we're going to do two things. One is the surface skimmer on this tank always clogs up with floating plants and it gets stuck in there, and so I usually just tuck it out of the way and don't even use it because it's more of a problem than it is, a benefit. So I've got that unclogged, and I'm going to let the surface skimmer thing do its work, but we're also going to do a big water change, and I'm going to continue drawing some of that old medicine, medicated water out of the tank. I've already done 2 water changes of probably about 30% each time, and again, we're going to do something similar to that today, maybe anywhere from 25 to 35%. Significant, but not enormous. While we're doing that, we're also going to get in and we're going to change the filter out because I just put a new filter on it, and what I did was simply take the biomaterial out of my old filter and put it in this new one. So it's basically a new housing and pump and everything, but it's my old biomaterial that's still in there, and that's all well and good and fine, and I'll be using that over. But I used the new material that came with the filter, and what it came with was a coarse sponge in each tray. And I don't know why, but I just put the coarse sponges back in, and then I put my biomedia in there, and I did not put any of the actual filter material in there except in the bottom tray. The very bottom tray has the filter material, so that's going to be changed out. And then in all of the consecutive trays, the 3 trays above that, I always lay more filter material, and then I put the biomaterial over top of that, so I get that filtration all the way through. And I think by doing that, we'll probably get a little bit better filtration than we're seeing right now. I think, honestly, once I get in there, I may find out I didn't even put any actual filtration in the bottom. I may have just left the coarse sponge in the bottom and done that all the way through the filter, and that's why we're not getting any kind of filtration of this really fine particulate matter. It's just passing right through all those coarse sponges. I don't know, but anyway, it's time to get in there and get that filter changed out a little bit. So we're going to go ahead and do a simple water change. I don't know how much we're actually going to talk about the tank or anything today, but we're just going to do the before and after, certainly, and then we'll see where we go from there. So have a look and consider that your before, and there's your after. So the filter wasn't quite set up the way I thought I'd set it up. It did have the media that came with it, and it did have the filter material that came with it, but it was not the coarse sponges that I thought it was. What it actually was that stuff. So it is like a filter material, but it's also still really coarse, and one of these was in each tray. So the bottom tray did have a coarse sponge as a pre-filter and a biofilter, and then it had one of these, and then each tray on top of it had one of these with the biomaterial sitting on top of that. So there was some filtration in there, but not quite what I normally would do. So we got that all straightened out. I also found out while we were in there that what was going on with all the crud that was in the plants was not exactly as I originally thought. As the more I dig into this tank and the more I work on it, the more I find out that things are slightly different than I keep thinking they are. And so all of that stuff I knocked loose and swirled out of the leaves, it was just as bad today as it was the other day. and it's all that green stuff keeps coming out of there. So I'm almost wondering if it's not the hair algae that I've been talking about that's sort of developing, and when I get in there and rustle my fingers through all that and all that stuff starts flowing out of there, is that hair algae being all broken apart and just broken into, I don't want to say individual cells necessarily, we wouldn't be able to see it, but, you know, little tiny pieces and little tiny groups of cells? Is that why it just keeps spreading all over the tank and growing on everything? Is because I'm swirling it around? I'm not sure, but it didn't really seem like it was the sort of crud and detritus that I was kind of thinking it had been when I got in there and swirled it around again. So I did that again. I swirled it all around and got as much cleaned out of the leaves as I could, or fronds, technically. I went through all of it. I went through all my, whatever that's up front, crypt, I think, and kept doing the water change. I drew a bunch of it out of there. Now we got the filter up and running again. I did install the UV light, and I do now have the UV light running. So if anybody watches this video in the near future, you feel free to remind me that I've got that UV light on there. I will forget, even though I'm going to leave myself a note to turn it off in a few days. I might even run it for a few hours a day for a week or something like that. But I think just leaving it on and letting it run for a day or two will be a good idea. And it'll start killing off some of that algae or whatever it is that's swirling around in there. So we got the tank a lot lighter. You know, we got a lot of that green color out of there, but I've still got a lot of that weird particulate sort of stuff swirling around in there. This no longer looks like the same kind of cloudy that we got when we changed the filter over. That was totally expected. It was just a little bit of cloudiness from a, you know, a little bump in the cycle, disrupted the cycle a little tiny bit. That was no big mystery, and it was nothing to ever worry about. I was never worried about that little bump in the, you know, cloudiness for a couple of days. I fully expected that. This is like a weird green cloudiness, and I think it's that stuff I was swirling around. So we'll see if having the surface skimmer on doesn't clear some of that out. I did see a bunch of it swirling around on the surface once we got in there to do the water change, and you can see a lot of it sort of collected on the surface again. I also cleared out most of the easy to grab floating water sprite and stuff. I got all that out of the tank. Just because it wasn't looking good anyway, and that's where the food was getting stuck and collecting, and so we can kind of get that out till we get everything sorted out, and then we can let some plants start growing back in there again, and so on and so forth. The other thing I want to point out is loach related, and if you'll notice, my big loach is fairly active, and what it's doing is rooting around and eating those little bits of food you see on the bottom. And I've been watching it do that all since, you know, the last hour since I put the food in there. Every time I've come in here, it's rooting around, eating food. And when it gets to where this food is, it just eats that too. But it's also been grubbing around in the gravel and going under the rocks. And so I had a bunch of detritus worms swirling around in this tank the other day. They don't go away by magic. You know, they're still in the tank. They're just down in the substrate now. And I'm wondering if the loach is eating them. But more importantly, when it gets to these little granules and tidbits of food, that's the medicated food that I've been putting in the tank. And so this loach is very clearly eating the medicated food. I watched the rainbow fish eat quite a bit of it. But when I put it in there at night, we come in the next morning and I will see, you know, 2 or 3 of these little things in the corner or something, but the rest of them that I put in there are gone. So somebody's been eating them at night, and now I've been watching that loach back there eat them. This loach that's really, really skinny now, that's the reason I put the medication in the tank, is I saw that swimming around, sort of grubbing around in the bottom like it was looking for food, and as soon as I put it in there, it swam over, picked a couple pieces up and just spit them right back out, and I don't know, maybe it ate 1 or 2 of them eventually, but from all I could tell, it's just kind of picked them up and spit them back out. So, you know, again, no luck on getting it to eat the medicated food. We're going to have to keep relying on medicating the tank itself and medicating the water, and no, I'm not catching it and taking it out of the tank and putting it in a different tank to do that. I've got loads and loads and loads of the medication. It's cheap. I'll go ahead and medicate it right here in this tank if I decide to medicate it again. So there you go. That's the progress we're making on the 125 right now. Still looking good. I'm still kind of waiting to decide when I get in there and do the old whackety chop. I'm really, really reluctant to do it. One of the reasons we've already started having issues on this tank was because I went in there and removed a bunch of plants. And whenever you do that, it just shifts the tank around. It just sets off a chain reaction, and you just start having issues. I'd kind of forgotten I had done that. This piece of wood right there used to have a huge clump of fern. That whole middle section of the tank was a big piece of fern. So when I pulled that out of there, I even said in the videos back then, I'm sure, I'm not going to bother going back and checking, but I'm sure I said, prepare, you know, stuff's going to go down in this tank. We're either going to see an explosion of algae or cyanobacteria or something. You know, we removed a huge chunk of plants. We allowed a bunch of light to shine down all into the tank where it wasn't shining before. And, you know, whenever you start making changes like that, you can just expect changes to happen within your tank. So, again, me going in there and yanking more plants out to try to, you know, correct for the changes that are already occurring. Again, I've just learned over the years to not do anything too dramatic and radical. Let's sort of get the tank sorted out first. My main concern I was having in here was that weird smell. Got to the bottom of that, no problem. Smells completely cleared up. It was not an issue with the tank at all. It was just me putting too much food in there, and I was literally smelling rotten food, and there was a dead fish that was stuck in the plants that I never found, and I was smelling that. And that, you know, that's it. That's what was going on with the smell. And, you know, other than that, it's the algae, which we already just talked about. It's the little bloom of cloudiness, which, again, we just talked about. I expected to see some cloudiness when I changed the filter over. And then the loaches have been dealing with whatever the loaches have been dealing with for a very long time. So they've got nothing to do with anything that's been going on recently here in the tank. But until we get on top of everything, I'm really reluctant to get in there and start, you know, making any major modifications and moving any plants or pulling anything out of there. So we'll see. Let's just give it some time. Let's let everything settle down, and we'll see how things go from there. So there you go. Make sure you're subscribed. You won't miss anything I got coming up on this tank or anything else. You never know what it's going to be with me. So thanks for watching. Don't forget this one is my 125. And I'll see you on the next one.